So with that, we have now the time to start our first keynote. So Iddo, it's all yours.
Thank you, Oleg. Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. A few words about why I'm here. I'm the only non-geek here, I think, in the room, more or less. But that's the whole point of this very interesting initiative that I learned about a year ago when we started working together with IEEE. I'm here because I understand that from my perspective, we have a lot in common. We are all talking about language. I'm talking about human language. You're talking about technology language, but it's the same. And we have to understand both of it. And we have some kind of an exchange that we have to expand. And I understand that in my world, I'm dealing with cybersecurity, which is completely new part of diplomacy, of international relations. I can't do much without technology, and I understand also that technologies need to have an understanding what the world beyond technology is all about. So I was very happy to learn that IEEE came up with this wonderful idea and initiative, experts in technology and policy. I'm dealing with international policy, and trying to build a bridge, but do it on a very concrete, actionable basis. So I very much welcome Oleg's remarks about coming out today with some concrete plan of action. We have to have that. So I'm here not just because the Israeli government is interested in this kind of a dialogue. I'm interested in it, but I think many governments around the world are interested in it. Some of you may have been here yesterday, and so you've probably heard the Deputy Secretary General talking about some processes taking place in the United Nations, about how countries work together to create more stability and security in cyberspace. All these discussions are not just very far away world that does not have any implication for technology. On the contrary, they are very, very important for technology. And part of the preparation for it was a series of seminars that took place in Geneva from January until now. And I attended those seminars, and in some of them, companies came in, technologists came in, and presented their ideas about how international agreements need to be applied. For example, export control, which is a very complicated issue in cybersecurity. How do you do that? There is one arrangement, the Wassenaar arrangement. Can it work? Does it work? What can we do to make it work? Very complicated. There is no answer. Those of you who are from Israel may be familiar with the debate that has been going on between the industry and government about the recent directive that the government published about export control, where the industry basically said, this is not workable. This is a sort of a very wide range of restrictions, probably, that will not help us to continue to produce what we are doing. So the government went back to the drawing table, came up with an intermediary version, and the discussion will continue with the industry. And it's the same everywhere around the world. The US, for example, they are part of the Wassenaar arrangement. We are not, but they had a suggestion in 2013. They realized it doesn't work, so they took it back, or they're trying to take it back and work something else around it. It's a very complicated and tough process. And it can only work, it can only really work in the real world with the technologists and the politicians and the economists sitting around the same table. And that's a very complicated process because we speak very different languages. So what I talk about cybersecurity is not the same as the rest of you, I think, and I'm not sure. And if I'm not sure, it's complicated to say anything. Yesterday we talked about stability. In my eyes, as in international relations, stability means no conflict. I don't know if stability means anything to you. In my world, I think you heard it yesterday, it's a perfect world because there are never bugs. Bugs don't exist. I just came to realize that in technology, when you're writing a program, your whole life is focused on that fact that you know that there is something there, there must be something there, that you have to be prepared for. And it's there. And it's clear that it's there, and you have to have some solutions, and you have to prepare for that. And when I don't care about bugs, that means that I can come up with any kind of agreement with any of you, and we'll say, well, you know, this ceiling is very high, and some of you will say, well, it's extremely high, and some will say, well, compared to, I don't know what tower, it's not so high. And we'll agree, that's the ceiling, and we all call it something else. We can't do that in technology, and that's the challenge that we have to bring our discussion to very concrete terms and try to find out some concrete level of language that from there we can go. So a few words about the global processes that take place that are relevant to the cybersecurity discussion. One is this government group of experts, a process that takes place within a committee in the United Nations that deals with arms control. It's a group of 25 countries. They draft a report with recommendations to the Secretary General of the United Nations, and usually they discuss, well, usually they've been discussing until now international law, how does it apply, which is very important, talking about moral issues, talking about privacy, talking about a lot of things. How norms apply, do we need new norms? How do we build confidence between countries, which is a very common tool in international relations. We agree, for example, that we don't attack certs, or we agree that we publish our cybersecurity policy. That's a confidence-building measure, because if Israel does that, and our neighbors do that, and other countries do that, we all more or less try to understand what we are talking about when we talk about cybersecurity. So that's a process that's very, very important within the United Nations. And it's directed by diplomats, but each team can bring on experts, can bring legal experts, and that's what's happening. So that's quite an interesting process, and it draws a lot of attention. It started somewhere in the late 90s, and nowadays most countries are very eager to be part of it. And if you heard the Deputy Secretary General talk yesterday, you heard that some prime ministers were calling the Secretary General to have their expert on the team. It was that important. So that's why he found the reason to apologize. Israel is not there. We wanted to be there. He understands we have a lot to contribute. It doesn't work out this time. Next time, I'm sure we will. But that's a very important process. It's a process that takes place within the United Nations that is trying also to connect the technological world to politics. The resolution of this discussion is very fuzzy, because that's a search for the lowest common denominator. So that's one process. Another one is among what we call more like-minded countries. So that's, for example, an organization called the Organization for Economic and Security Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, and they drafted a paper about those confidence-building measures. They just worked on that with Russia on board, the US on board, and they've managed to produce at least two sets of steps that can take place. Of course, that's a very important process. So together with these processes, there are also actions that take place on the international scene to enhance cybersecurity. We have countries that are setting up their own certs. We have countries that are connecting certs with each other, which is a process that takes place through various organizations. We have countries that are working on non-proliferation on export control regimes, like a Wassenaar arrangement, trying to find out how they can work on that. And of course, there are the legal experts that are meeting around the world discussing how do we deal with cybersecurity, how do we deal with cybercrime. So we have, for example, the Budapest Convention. So there is a sort of a process. On the one hand, there is a global policy process. Another one is a very goal-directed, objective-directed process, and those are trying to complement each other. At the background of those processes, there is some technological expertise, but not much, mainly because it's an abstract discussion. But this is just an initial stage. So I can tell you, I myself feel I need to have more technological expertise, and I would like to have somebody next to me who will be able to tell me, to map out what is happening. And I think the coming years, this kind of a discussion will dive into deeper issues that will be discussed today, I think, in various ways, and will require this kind of cooperation between politicians and technologists. Government has a lot of problems and issues with dealing with technology. Some of it have to do, and most of you will know that, with maintaining technologists on board, because it's much more attractive to work in the market, in the industry, than the government. It's interesting, but that's a fact that governments are far behind the advancement of technology. And part of it has to do with the fact that people who are in technology don't like to work with government. That's not the exciting part for most people. That's just a fact of life. So we have to find all kinds of schemes and programs to attract those people to come on board. And we can do that in various ways, not directly, but for example, in Israel, it works in times of crisis, people volunteer. But it's not that it's a time of crisis in security terms, but it is a time of crisis in the velocity of development of technology now in the world. We are far behind understanding what are the challenges. So we do need to have this kind of dialogue and strengthen it and support it, again, with identifying very concrete programs and fields of work, of cooperation. Somebody mentioned in one of those fora that took place in Geneva the possibility of setting up an international forensic laboratory for cybersecurity that will be impartial, that would be objective. And of course, that's an interesting idea. But I think it was interesting because it's the idea that we have to have some kind of objective, some kind of objective information flow coming in to help us identify those problems. So again, in this context of the ETAP initiative, I would suggest to all of us to think globally, act locally, but think globally. I think ETAP offers a very good platform for this kind of discussion. And the fact that it is going to take place and already took place in several countries around the world is very important, but I think we here in Israel have a very important challenge. Having such a strong industry and so much support from the academy, we need to have a very specific contribution to this process of making the bridge between technology and policy wider and have it been crossed by many more people than nowadays. It's a huge challenge. I can tell you from my world that everybody that thinks about technology, they say, oh, there is this IT guy, let's have him do that. On the other hand, I can tell you that most of my colleagues envy what I'm doing very much, and they say, oh, that's really exciting. I mean, it's not just I'm not dealing with a lot of topics that most of us deal with the whole time, which are there, international affairs, regional security, and so on. But it's exciting because people see that something is developing here in cyber that makes this world connected, that everybody is much more connected, that any country, any people, any company, and any organization. But what we're asking, I think, through this process is to make this easier, this kind of connection, make it more accessible to everyone. Understanding technology, I don't need to learn language, which I'm trying to learn Python and I think. But the point is to find what really makes, what's challenging for me is the technology, what would be challenging for you would understand the international context. That's why I'm here, that's why we are talking together, to try and identify where the processes are going and where they are connected. So I very much welcome this initiative. I'm very happy to be here for a second time and looking very much forward to the discussion today. And I wish all of us a very fruitful event. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Iddo. It's really a great speech, and when I'm listening to what you talk about, one thought comes to my mind. When we talk about IoT, one of the key elements of our discussions is always semantic interoperability, which is basically the ability of systems to exchange knowledge and information. And what you just said basically means that we need to develop semantic interoperability, not among the machines and systems, but different constituencies, different stakeholders that come to the table. I think it's a very, very, very important point. Thank you.